The sun bore down on the Korangal Valley with merciless intensity. Afghanistan's unforgiving mountains stood silent witness to the dance of death playing out in their shadows. Lieutenant Commander Richard Iron Blackwood pressed his body flat against the rocky soil, his SEAL team scattered in defensive positions along the ridgeline. Their mission to extract a high-value intelligence asset had gone sideways 20 minutes ago when Taliban fighters emerged from hidden positions throughout the valley. The radio at his shoulder crackled with urgent voices. Overwatch, this is Eagle 6. We need air support now. Repeat, immediate air support. Eagle 6, this is Overwatch. All air assets engaged elsewhere. Nearest support minimum 20 minutes out. Blackwood cursed under his breath. 20 minutes might as well be a lifetime. He scanned the valley floor through his binoculars. The abandoned village below seemed deserted, but he knew better. Movement caught his eye, a flash of fabric disappearing behind a stone wall. Then another. The enemy was maneuvering, preparing to encircle them. Tighten perimeter, he ordered through his comm. They're setting up for a push. Master Chief Peterson crawled to his position, dust caking his weathered face. Sir, our exfil route is compromised. Satellite shows vehicle movement cutting off our planned extraction point. Blackwood nodded grimly. They were boxed in. Classic ambush scenario. New plan, we move north through the narrow pass, make our way to secondary extraction at grid Charlie 7. The words had barely left his mouth when the first heavy round impacted 3 feet from his position, showering both men with debris. Blackwood rolled to cover, pulling Peterson with him. Sniper, Peterson hissed. Distance shot. Professional. This wasn't typical Taliban tactics. Most fighters in this region lacked the training for precision shooting at extended ranges. This was something else. More rounds impacted around them, pinning the SEAL team to their positions. Blackwood counted the shots in timing, methodical, patient. This shooter knew exactly what they were doing, hurting the team, restricting their movement options, gradually eliminating their cover. The radio crackled again. Commander hostile at your 2 o'clock elevated position. Blackwood shifted carefully, using his scope to scan the ridgeline across the valley. Nothing visible. Whoever this shooter was, they knew how to remain concealed. A veteran. Someone with serious training. The SEAL commander felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. They were facing a professional who understood exactly how special operations teams moved and thought. All units hold position. Conserve ammunition. Wait for them to make a mistake. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. The afternoon sun began its descent, casting longer shadows across the valley. The hostile fire had become sporadic but remained deadly accurate, keeping the SEAL team pinned down while local fighters moved into position below. Whatever extraction plan they developed would mean fighting their way through prepared positions. The odds were deteriorating by the minute. Blackwood made his decision. On my mark, we move in pairs. Leapfrog to that outcropping 50 meters north. Peterson, you're with me. 3, 2. A sudden flash of light caught his eye, reflection off glass, scope lens. The glint vanished instantly, but Blackwood had seen enough. He froze, the realization sinking in with terrible clarity. The enemy sniper had him perfectly lined up. He felt it with the certainty that comes from years in combat, the cold awareness of being in someone's crosshairs. Looking down, he saw it, the telltale red laser dot centered on his chest. Not Taliban. They didn't use targeting lasers. This was someone else. Time slowed. Blackwood had seen enough combat to know when odds became impossible. His mind flashed to his wife and daughter back home. Sarah would be finishing kindergarten soon. He had promised to be there. Commander, Peterson's voice seemed distant. Blackwood remained still, oddly calm in what he knew were his final moments. The red dot held steady over his heart. The shooter was taking their time ensuring the kill. Then something impossible happened. The red dot disappeared. Not because the shooter had moved, but because the sound of a single shot cracked across the valley. A shot that hadn't been aimed at Blackwood or his team. Through his scope, Blackwood watched in disbelief as the enemy sniper's body slumped forward from a hidden position on the opposite ridge, nearly a mile away. The man's rifle clattered against rocks as he fell, his scope shattered, with a single bullet hole through its center. Someone had shot the shooter. Through his own scope. What the hell was that? Peterson whispered. Blackwood didn't answer. His mind raced to process what had just happened. The math was staggering. The distance, the angle, the precision required to place a round through another sniper's scope while they were in firing position. It was a shot that perhaps a handful of people in the world could make. In the confusion that followed, the SEAL team seized their opportunity. With the enemy's primary overwatch eliminated, they moved quickly through the pass, engaging the fighters below with surgical precision. The Taliban forces suddenly, without their expert guidance, fell into disarray. 20 minutes later, the SEALs had broken through the ambush and were moving rapidly toward their secondary extraction point. As they approached the landing zone where their helicopter would arrive, Blackwood held up his fist, signaling the team to halt. "Sweep the area," he ordered. "Find out who took that shot." The team spread out, searching the ridgelines and elevated positions. Blackwood himself climbed to a rocky outcropping, provided a clear line of sight to where the enemy sniper had been positioned. It was the perfect vantage point, concealed stable with multiple escape routes. "Sir found something," called Sergeant Wilson. "You need to see this." Blackwood joined him at a small natural depression in the rocks. The position had been immaculately prepared. No trash, no food wrappers, not even a water bottle. Professional discipline. The only evidence anyone had been there at all was a single spent cartridge casing polished to eliminate fingerprints and a small piece of metal next to it. Blackwood picked up the metal piece. It was a rifle shell casing that had been flattened and etched with a message. 4 simple words that made his skin prickle. "From a ghost, MS." "What does it mean, sir?" Wilson asked. Blackwood pocketed the casing. "It means someone was watching over us. Someone who didn't want us to know they were there." The helicopter appeared on the horizon, the distinctive thump of its rotors echoing off the mountains. As the team prepared for extraction, Blackwood took one last look at the vast, rugged terrain. Somewhere out there, a guardian angel with extraordinary skills had saved his life and the lives of his men. He had no idea who MS was, but he owed them everything. "You coming, Commander?" Peterson called over the roar of the approaching helicopter. Blackwood nodded, but his mind was already working on the mystery. In all his years of service, he'd never seen shooting like that. It wasn't just skill, it was something beyond mastery. And whoever had done it had chosen to remain unknown, slipping away like a phantom after saving American lives. The ghost sniper, a mystery he wouldn't forget. 1 year later, Pentagon, Arlington, Virginia. Colonel Thomas Thunder Warren stood at rigid attention outside the heavy oak doors of Conference Room Alpha 6, ignoring the dull ache in his right knee. At 70, his body carried the evidence of decades of service. The stiffness in his joints on cold mornings, scars from wounds received in conflicts most Americans had never heard of, and the ramrod-straight posture that had become so ingrained he couldn't relax it if he tried. The young aide at the desk glanced up nervously. "They're ready for you now, Colonel." Warren nodded curtly and entered the room. Inside, 3 men and 1 woman sat around a polished conference table. He recognized General Maxwell immediately. They'd served together in Panama decades ago. The others were unfamiliar, but their bearing and the subtle indicators on their civilian attire told Warren everything he needed to know. Intelligence community, likely CIA. "Colonel Warren," General Maxwell rose to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Warren took the offered seat. "When the Secretary of Defense requests your presence, sir, retirement plans take a back seat." A thin smile crossed Maxwell's face. "Some things never change, Thunder." He gestured to the others. "Allow me to introduce Deputy Director Carson Hayes from Langley, Colonel Roberts from Special Operations Command, and Dr. Eleanor Fisher from Defense Intelligence." Warren nodded to each in turn, noting the way Hayes studied him with particular intensity. Intelligence types always had that look. Assessing, calculating, measuring. He'd worked with enough of them during the Cold War to recognize it instantly. Colonel Warren and Hayes began without preamble. "What do you know about Operation Artemis?" Warren kept his expression neutral, but his mind immediately traveled back 4 decades. Artemis, a name he hadn't heard spoken aloud since 1985. "That depends entirely on who's asking and why," he replied carefully. Hayes slid a file across the table. Top Secret was stamped across it in bold red letters. "We have a situation, one that appears to connect to your past work." Warren opened the file. The first photograph showed a spent rifle cartridge with an etching "From a ghost, MS." His heart rate increased slightly, but decades of training kept any reaction from showing on his face. The next several pages contained after-action reports from special operations missions in Afghanistan and Iraq. Each described the same phenomenon: expert sniper fire from unknown sources eliminating high-value targets, or hostile snipers who had American forces pinned down. In each case, the mysterious shooter vanished without trace, leaving only a signature shell casing with the same message. "Someone's been helping our boys," Warren observed, his voice deliberately neutral. 17 confirmed incidents over the past 3 years, Hayes said, all featuring shooting at extreme ranges under adverse conditions. Shots that frankly exceed what our current sniper programs consider possible. Warren closed the file. "And you think this connects to Artemis because every single incident involves operations you were connected to during the Cold War," General Maxwell interjected. "Forward bases you established, intelligence networks you created, even some of the same geographical locations where your team operated in the 1980s. Warren leaned back in his chair. The room felt suddenly colder. Artemis was decommissioned in 1991. All personnel were reassigned or separated from service. "That's the official record," Hayes agreed. "But we both know there's more to it." "What exactly do you want from me?" General Maxwell exchanged glances with the others before answering. "We need you to help us identify this shooter. Determine if they represent a threat or an asset." Warren's eyes narrowed. "And if they turn out to be an asset, then we bring them in, formalize their relationship with us, make sure they're operating under proper authority. And if they're deemed a threat," Hayes answered, this time his voice cold and precise, "then we take appropriate action." Warren studied the CIA man's face. He'd known men like Hayes throughout his career, bureaucrats with power who saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities, men who made decisions about life and death from comfortable offices who never had to look in the eyes of those affected by those decisions. "You mentioned initials," Warren said. "MS, you have a theory about who that might be." Dr. Fisher spoke for the first time, that her voice carrying the crisp precision of an academic. "We've cross-referenced the pattern of operations against all known snipers with those initials. Most are accounted for deceased or lack the capabilities demonstrated in these incidents. Except one," Hayes added, sliding another file across the table. Warren opened it and his breath caught. The photograph was old, taken sometime in the mid-1980s. A young woman in her early 20s with light brown hair, cut short and practical, stood beside a specialized rifle at a training range in Virginia. Her eyes held the focused intensity he remembered well. The name beneath the photo, Morgan Stevens. Morgan was confirmed KIA in Berlin, 1991. Warren said, his voice suddenly rough. "I received the intelligence myself." "No body was ever recovered," Hayes countered. "And there have been anomalies in the years since. Unexplained sightings. Operations where targets were eliminated with similar shooting characteristics." Warren closed the file, his mind racing through implications. Morgan Stevens had been his finest student, a natural prodigy with uncanny abilities. She had also been the only female operative in Project Artemis, a fact that had raised eyebrows throughout the intelligence community at the time. If, and this is a significant if, Morgan Stevens is alive, what makes you think she'd have any interest in cooperating with you? Warren asked. Hayes smiled thinly. "That's precisely why you're here, Colonel. Your connection, your history. She trusted you once." Warren stood, feeling every one of his 70 years. "I'll need full access to all intelligence related to these incidents, complete operational autonomy, and my choice of liaison." General Maxwell nodded. "Done. Who did you have in mind?" "Lieutenant Commander Richard Blackwood, SEAL Team 6. He encountered our mystery shooter firsthand in Afghanistan last year. Blackwood has been promoted. He's running operations for DevGru now," Colonel Roberts noted. "Even better," Warren replied. "He'll have the clearance and resources that we need." As Warren left the Pentagon an hour later, his mind sifted through the possibilities. Morgan Stevens alive. The thought both exhilarated and troubled him. She had been the most gifted shooter he had ever trained, capable of calculations and adjustments that seemed almost supernatural. But she had also been fiercely independent, questioning authority in ways that made her both effective and dangerous. If she was truly the ghost sniper operating independently for all these years, bringing her in would not be simple. Morgan had never been someone who followed orders she didn't believe in. And after whatever had happened in Berlin, the mission that had supposedly claimed her life, she might have very good reasons to remain a ghost. Warren pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered. Special Projects Division. Authorization code Sierra Tango 791, Warren said. I need everything we have on Berlin. November 91, the Artemis termination. That archive requires alpha clearance, sir. Check your screen. Authorization should be coming through now. A pause. Confirmed, Colonel Warren. Files will be uploaded to your secure server within the hour. Warren ended the call and stared out at the Washington Monument gleaming in the distance. After 30 years, ghosts from the Cold War were resurfacing. If Morgan was alive, she had her reasons for operating in shadows. And those reasons might lead back to secrets some very powerful people would prefer stayed buried. Whatever the truth, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. If Morgan Stevens was the ghost sniper, approaching her as a potential threat would be a grave mistake. She had always been 3 moves ahead of everyone else. Time had likely only sharpened that edge. Thunder Warren had trained her to disappear to survive against impossible odds, to trust her instincts above all else. Now he would need to use everything he knew about her to find a woman who didn't want to be found. A woman who could put a bullet through a sniper's scope from over a mile away. The ghost had remained hidden for decades. But now, the hunt would begin. Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Dam Neck, Virginia. Commander Richard Blackwood studied the intelligence photographs spread across the briefing table. 1 year had passed since the Korengal Valley incident, but the memory remained vivid. The red dot on his chest, the impossible shot that saved his life, the mysterious message left behind. The shot was taken from approximately 1,500 yards, he explained to the assembled group. Uphill angle with variable crosswinds between 8 and 12 knots. The round passed directly through the enemy sniper's scope while he was in firing position. Colonel Warren, seated at the head of the table, nodded thoughtfully. Despite his age, Warren's eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. The legendary Special Forces officer had arrived 2 days ago with direct authorization from the Secretary of Defense, a fact that had raised eyebrows throughout Naval Special Warfare Command. That shot exceeds established parameters for even our best snipers, added Master Chief Peterson, who had been with Blackwood in Afghanistan, especially considering the environmental factors. Which is precisely why we're here, Warren said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of decades of command. This wasn't a lucky shot. It was the work of someone with exceptional skills and training, someone who has been operating independently for years. Blackwood studied Warren carefully. The old colonel had been vague about his exact role in this investigation, but his reputation preceded him. During the Cold War, Warren had run some of the most sensitive special operations behind the Iron Curtain. His teams were legendary for their effectiveness and their absolute secrecy. Most of their missions remained classified even decades later. You have a theory about who our ghost sniper might be, Blackwood stated rather than asked. Warren exchanged glances with the CIA liaison Carson Hayes before responding. We believe these incidents may be connected to a Cold War program called Project Artemis. It was a specialized sniper training initiative developed in the late 1970s in response to Soviet advances in the field. Hayes opened a laptop and activated a secure presentation. Artemis was designed to push the boundaries of what was considered possible in long-range shooting. The program selected candidates with exceptional natural abilities and subjected them to experimental training methods. Images appeared on the screen. Training facilities hidden in remote locations, specialized equipment, and personnel files with most details redacted. The program was officially terminated in 1991, Hayes continued. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the specialized skills were deemed unnecessary for the changing geopolitical landscape. And unofficially, Blackwood pressed. Warren's expression remained neutral. Unofficially, there were complications, operational disagreements. Some personnel were lost in the field. Blackwood detected the careful wording. Warren was sharing only what he felt necessary, holding back significant details. You think one of your Artemis shooters is still alive, operating independently, Blackwood concluded, and for some reason they've taken a particular interest in protecting American special operations teams. Warren nodded slightly. That's our working theory. Why now? Why after all these years? That's what we need to determine, Hayes interjected. If this individual is indeed connected to Artemis, they possess training and knowledge that remains highly classified. Their motives and loyalties need to be assessed. Blackwood caught the subtle emphasis on assessed. and understood the unspoken implication. The CIA wanted to determine if this ghost sniper was an asset or a liability, and if the latter, they would take steps to eliminate the potential threat. I've reviewed the after-action reports, Blackwood said. In every instance, this shooter has acted to protect American forces. Not once have they targeted our personnel or compromised our operations. That suggests clear loyalty. Or a more complex agenda we don't yet understand, Hayes countered. Individuals operating outside the chain of command, regardless of apparent intent, represent an unknown variable. In our business, unknown variables are dangerous. Blackwood turned to Warren. You train these people. What's your assessment? A flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed Warren's weathered features. Artemis operators were exceptional, not just in shooting abilities, but in judgment and independence. They were taught to think beyond standard protocols to make difficult decisions in isolation. You still haven't told us who you suspect, Peterson noted. Warren nodded to Hayes, who brought up a new image on the screen. A personnel file appeared heavily redacted, but with a clear photograph of a young woman with light brown hair and intense green eyes. Morgan Stevens, Warren said, one of our most gifted operators, officially listed as killed in action during an operation in Berlin in November 1991. Blackwood studied the photograph. The woman appeared to be in her early 20s with the focused expression he recognized from experienced shooters. If she was still alive, she would be in her 50s now. The shell casing left at your position in Korengal was signed MS, Hayes pointed out. Several other incidents have featured similar signatures. If she died in Berlin, how could she be our ghost? Peterson asked. No body was ever recovered, Warren replied. The circumstances were complicated, meaning classified, Blackwood translated. Warren didn't deny it. What matters now is determining if Morgan is alive and operating independently. If so, we need to understand her motivations and establish contact. Your mission, Hayes said, addressing Blackwood directly, is to work with Colonel Warren to identify and locate this individual. Once found, you will assess whether they represent a resource to be recruited or a threat to be neutralized. Blackwood felt a surge of irritation at Hayes's clinical terminology. This individual saved my life and the lives of my men. If it is Morgan Stevens, she's demonstrated clear support for American forces. Your personal gratitude is noted, Commander, Hayes said coolly, but this investigation will proceed based on facts, not sentiment. The briefing concluded shortly after, with Blackwood assigned to work directly under Warren's authority for the duration of the operation. As the others filed out, Blackwood remained behind with the aging colonel. You knew her well, Blackwood observed once they were alone. Warren didn't answer immediately. He gathered the classified documents methodically, his movements precise despite his age. I recruited her, he finally said. Trained her personally. Morgan was exceptional. Not just her shooting abilities, though, those were remarkable. She had an intuitive understanding of battlefield dynamics that couldn't be taught. And you believe she survived whatever happened in Berlin. Warren's eyes met Blackwood's. Morgan was resourceful beyond measure. If anyone could have survived that operation gone wrong, it would have been her. But you never looked for her. A flash of pain crossed Warren's face. Orders were explicit. The operation was classified at the highest levels. All personnel were presumed lost. Yet here we are 30 years later with evidence suggesting she's very much alive. Warren nodded slowly. Here we are indeed. What aren't you telling me, Colonel? If we're going to work together, I need the full picture. Warren seemed to make a decision. The Berlin operation was more than just another mission. It was connected to internal politics, power struggles within the intelligence community. Morgan may have uncovered something she wasn't meant to know. Something that made her a liability rather than an asset, Blackwood concluded. Perhaps, but that was 30 years ago. The world has changed. Many of the players from that era are gone. But not all of them, Blackwood observed. Hayes seems particularly invested in this investigation. Warren's expression revealed nothing. Carson Hayes is a career intelligence officer. He follows orders and protects institutional interests. Nothing more, nothing less. Blackwood wasn't convinced, but he recognized the conversation had reached its limit for now. Where do we start looking for a ghost? We begin with what we know, Warren said, pulling out a map and spreading it across the table. The incidents follow a pattern. Each location connects to operations I ran during the Cold War. Places Morgan would remember would associate with specific meanings. He placed markers at various points across the map: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, small points in Eastern Europe. She's communicating through these locations, leaving breadcrumbs for someone who knows how to read them. For you, Blackwood stated. Warren nodded, a hint of pride entering his voice. Morgan was always the best student, patient, calculating. If she wanted to remain completely invisible, she could. The fact that she's leaving these messages means she wants to be found, but only by the right person. So where does the trail lead? Warren studied the map, his finger tracing invisible connections between the markers. There's a pattern here, a message in the sequence. His finger stopped on a location in the southwestern United States. Arizona, near the border. There's an annual underground shooting competition there. Invitation only, no official records. It attracts the best marksmen in the world. You think she'll be there? I think she might leave us another breadcrumb, Warren replied. Morgan never does anything directly if an indirect approach would be more secure. She won't show herself openly, but she might leave a sign for us to follow. Blackwood considered this. When is this competition? 3 days from now. Then we'd better get moving, Colonel. As they prepared to depart, Blackwood found himself both intrigued and uneasy. The ghost sniper had saved his life, demonstrated clear support for American forces. Yet the CIA seemed determined to treat her as a potential threat. Warren clearly had his own agenda, holding back crucial information about the past. Somewhere between these competing interests lay the truth about Morgan Stevens, a woman trained to disappear who had chosen to remain in the shadows for decades while still reaching out to protect American soldiers. A ghost who left just enough traces to be followed by those who knew where to look. Blackwood had spent his career hunting America's enemies. Now he was hunting someone who had saved his life. The irony wasn't lost on him, nor was the moral complexity of his mission. If Morgan Stevens was indeed alive, operating independently all these years, she would not be easy to find unless she wanted to be found. And if they did find her, Blackwood wasn't entirely certain whose side he would be on. The Arizona border terrain stretched harsh and unforgiving under the relentless sun. Blackwood adjusted his position in the observation blind he and Warren had established on a ridge overlooking the makeshift shooting range. Below, the underground competition was in full swing, drawing elite marksmen from across the world. Former military specialists, private security contractors, and a few whose backgrounds remained deliberately obscure. Quite the collection of talent, Warren commented, scanning the participants through high-powered binoculars. But no sign of our ghost. Blackwood studied the shooters through his own optics. Would you recognize her after all these years? Morgan had a distinctive way of handling her weapons. Small adjustments, unique positioning. I'd know it immediately. They watched for hours as competitors tackled increasingly difficult challenges. Extreme range targets, moving objects, shots requiring complex calculations for wind and elevation. The level of marksmanship was extraordinary, well beyond what most military qualification courses would demand. Final event starting, Blackwood noted, as the organizers set up the most challenging course of the day. Targets at varying distances with severe wind conditions created by industrial fans. If she's here, this would be the moment to show her skills. Warren suddenly stiffened beside him. Southwest corner, the observer in the gray cap. Blackwood shifted his focus to where Warren indicated. A figure stood apart from the main crowd, watching the proceedings with careful attention. The person wore nondescript clothing, faded jeans, a light jacket despite the heat, and a gray baseball cap pulled low. Nothing remarkable except for their positioning. Perfect vantage point to observe all participants while maintaining multiple exit routes. Is it her? Blackwood asked. Warren continued to study the figure. Can't confirm, but the positioning is textbook Artemis protocol for surveillance. Maintain maximum visibility while ensuring at least 3 escape routes at all times. As they watched, the figure seemed to sense their observation, head turning slightly toward their hidden position. Despite being over half a mile away, Blackwood felt a chill as the person's gaze seemed to lock directly onto their concealed location. Without any obvious alarm or hurry, the observer calmly turned and walked away, disappearing behind a cluster of vehicles. She made us, Warren said, already moving. Let's go. They descended rapidly, but by the time they reached the competition grounds, there was no sign of the mysterious observer. A thorough search of the surrounding area yielded nothing. Whoever had been watching had vanished completely. Definitely Artemis training, Warren confirmed. The escape was too clean, Too professional. Blackwood approached one of the competition officials. The person watching from the southwest corner. Do you know who that was? The man shrugged. Lots of observers come and go. This isn't exactly an official event with registration. Did anyone unusual register as a competitor? The official hesitated, then led them to a makeshift scoring table. We had one strange entry. Someone registered under the name Ghost, but never showed for their slot. Paid cash entry fee left this behind. He handed Blackwood a small envelope. Inside was a spent rifle cartridge, polished to a shine with the now familiar inscription, MS. Along with it was a torn piece of paper with GPS coordinates. Warren examined the cartridge. It's her. She knew we were coming. How could she possibly know that? Blackwood asked. Because she's been watching us longer than we've been watching her, Warren replied. These coordinates, they're in Montana, near a place I once owned. A trap, Warren shook his head. An invitation, but only for those she chooses to meet. Later that evening, in their secure hotel room, Blackwood watched as Warren pored over satellite imagery of the Montana coordinates. The location appeared to be a remote cabin in the wilderness miles from the nearest town. This was a training site, Warren explained. Off the books, a place where I took the most promising Artemis candidates for specialized instruction. Morgan spent months there learning advanced fieldcraft. If she's been monitoring us, she'll know the CIA is involved, Blackwood noted. She may see this as a threat rather than a rescue mission. Warren's expression hardened. Hayes doesn't know about these coordinates, and he won't. Not yet. Before the CIA gets involved, I need to understand what Morgan has been doing all these years and why she's chosen to reveal herself now. You don't trust Hayes. I trust that he has his orders and will follow them. But institutional memory is long in the intelligence community. Old operations, old decisions. They cast shadows that reach into the present. The Berlin mission, Blackwood guessed. Warren nodded slowly. Berlin changed everything. What was supposed to be a standard intelligence gathering operation turned into something else. Something went wrong. Communications were lost. When we re-established contact, all operatives were reported deceased. But you never found Morgan's body. No, just blood evidence enough to suggest fatal injuries. The Cold War was ending. The Soviet Union was collapsing. Priorities shifted overnight. The investigation was cursory at best. And now, 30 years later, she resurfaces, Blackwood mused, helping American forces in combat zones, leaving messages only you would understand. Morgan was always thinking 3 steps ahead. If she's alive, if she's been operating independently all these years, she has her reasons, and those reasons might lead back to Berlin. Blackwood considered this. The CIA wants us to assess whether she's an asset or a threat, but your priority is finding the truth about what happened 30 years ago. Warren's weathered face showed a flicker of emotion. I owe her that much. Morgan was the best operator I ever trained. Whatever happened in Berlin, she deserved better than to be written off as collateral damage. So we follow her invitation to Montana. We do, Warren confirmed, but carefully. If Morgan has survived this long without detection, she's maintained her skills. She'll have the entire area prepared. Observation posts, escape routes, probably defensive measures. Approaching her as a potential hostile would be a mistake, Blackwood said. A potentially fatal one, Warren agreed. We go in open, transparent. No tactical team, no support elements she might detect. Just the 2 of us. Blackwood nodded slowly. When do we leave? First light tomorrow. I've arranged for a private aircraft to avoid travel records. As far as Hayes is concerned, we're following leads in California. As they prepared their equipment for the journey, Blackwood found himself increasingly curious about the woman they were pursuing. Morgan Stevens had been a ghost for 3 decades, yet had repeatedly risked exposure to protect American forces. Whatever her reasons for remaining hidden, her actions suggested a continuing loyalty to her country. Tell me about her, Blackwood said as they worked. Not just her skills. Who was Morgan Stevens? Warren paused, memory taking him back decades. She grew up in Montana. Father was a former Army Ranger who became a hunting guide. Mother was a mathematics professor. Morgan learned marksmanship almost before she could walk, and she had an innate ability to calculate trajectories, windage, and elevation adjustments that seemed almost supernatural. How did she end up in Artemis? I found her at a civilian shooting competition when she was 19. She outshot military professionals twice her age. When I approached her about serving her country, she asked only one question: will I be able to make a difference? Not about pay, not about recognition, just impact. Warren's expression softened with the memory. She was brilliant, absorbed everything we taught her, and then pushed beyond it. Developed techniques we still use in training programs today. But she was also independent, questioned orders when they didn't make tactical sense. That made some in the command structure uncomfortable, including Hayes. Warren's eyes narrowed slightly. Hayes was just starting his career back then, but his mentor, William Reynolds, was heavily involved in Artemis oversight. Reynolds never appreciated operators who thought for themselves. Is Reynolds still active? Retired officially. But men like that never truly leave the game. They just change positions. The implications hung in the air between them. If Morgan Stevens had survived a mission gone wrong, if she had spent 30 years in the shadows while still serving her country in her own way, there might be powerful people who preferred she remain officially deceased. Blackwood thought again of the impossible shot in the Korengal Valley, the precision and skill it represented. Such abilities didn't fade with time. They sharpened. The woman they were seeking wasn't just a ghost from the past. She was a living legend who had chosen to remain hidden while still protecting those who served. As dawn approached, Blackwood's phone buzzed with an incoming message. He checked it, frowning at the screen. Problem? Warren asked. Hayes. He wants a progress report in person before we continue the investigation. Warren considered this news. He's suspicious. Or just following protocol. Delay him. Tell him we found promising leads that require immediate follow-up. Blackwood sent a carefully worded response, but the unease remained. The CIA clearly had their own agenda regarding Morgan Stevens. Hayes hadn't shared all the information they possessed, just as Warren was holding back crucial details about the past. Somewhere in Montana, a ghost was waiting for them. A woman trained to disappear to survive against impossible odds to make shots that defied conventional ballistics. She had invited them into her domain on her terms. Whatever game was being played had rules Blackwood didn't fully understand. But one thing was increasingly clear. Finding Morgan Stevens might uncover secrets that powerful people had spent decades trying to bury. And ghosts from the Cold War could still be deadly when disturbed. The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly under the early morning sky, primeval and undisturbed. Colonel Thomas Warren guided their rented Jeep along a barely visible forest road, the vehicle bouncing over terrain that seemed determined to reject human intrusion. Thick pine forest gave way occasionally to sweeping meadows, the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. Blackwood studied the GPS coordinates against the printed topographical maps they'd brought. Technology was unreliable in these remote areas, and Warren had insisted on traditional navigation methods. 2 miles ahead, Blackwood said, there should be a creek crossing, then the road splits. Warren nodded, his weathered hands gripping the wheel with practiced ease. Morgan would have changed the approach. The old access route is too obvious. You think she's watching us now? Without question. Warren's eyes scanned the tree line methodically. Probably has been since we landed in Helena. The question isn't whether she's watching, but what she's decided about our intentions. They fell silent as Warren navigated a particularly rough section of road. The isolation was profound, the kind of wilderness where a person could disappear for decades if they knew the land. Morgan Stevens had grown up in these mountains. This was her territory in every sense. We should stop here, Warren announced, pulling the Jeep into a small clearing. The cabin is roughly a mile through those trees. Walking in gives her time to assess our approach. Blackwood nodded, understanding the strategy. No weapons, just sidearms, standard procedure. Anything more would signal hostile intent. They gathered minimal gear and began hiking along a faint trail. Warren moved with surprising agility for his age, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings with the ingrained habits of a lifetime in special operations. You've maintained contact with other Artemis personnel over the years? Blackwood asked as they walked. Warren shook his head. Most died in service. A few retired, disappeared into civilian life. Artemis was never a large program. Quality over quantity was our mandate. At peak, we had perhaps 20 operators. And Morgan was the best. A hint of pride crossed Warren's face. She rewrote our understanding of what was possible. Some of her techniques seemed impossible until she demonstrated them repeatedly. like shooting through another sniper's scope. Precisely. Morgan could calculate complex ballistic solutions in her head, adjusting for variables that most snipers need computers to manage. Her mother's mathematical genius combined with her father's natural hunting instincts created something unique. The trail narrowed as they continued deeper into the forest. Blackwood noticed signs that would be invisible to untrained observers, subtle marks on trees, small adjustments to the natural environment that created sight lines and observation posts. This area had been carefully prepared by someone with extensive fieldcraft knowledge. "Tell me about Berlin," Blackwood said. "What really happened?" Warren was silent for several moments, the only sound their boots on the forest floor. "The wall had fallen," he finally said. "The Soviet Union was collapsing. But certain factions within the KGB were determined to preserve their power. We received intelligence about a meeting in East Berlin, former Stasi officers transferring files and assets to these KGB hardliners. Morgan was inserted to gather intelligence, identify the players involved." "Standard intelligence gathering. Why did it go wrong?" Warren's expression darkened. "The operation was compromised. Someone gave up her position. When communications were reestablished, our team found signs of a firefight, blood evidence, matching Morgan's type, but no body. You think she was betrayed?" "I know she was betrayed. What I don't know is by whom." Blackwood considered this. "And you suspect someone within our own intelligence services." The mission parameters changed at the last minute. Personnel were reassigned, security protocols were altered, all indicators of internal compromise. "Does Hayes know you suspect this?" "Hayes knows I have questions about Berlin. Whether he knows the extent of those questions depends on what's in my file." They reached a small rise and suddenly the forest opened to reveal a clearing. In the center stood a rustic cabin, well-maintained, but designed to blend with its surroundings. Smoke rose from the chimney, the only indication anyone might be present. Warren held up his hand, stopping their advance. "We approach openly from here. Keep your hands visible." They stepped into the clearing, making no attempt at concealment. The cabin door remained closed, no movement visible through the windows. "Morgan," Warren called out. "It's Thunder. We got your message." Silence answered him. The wind whispered through the pines, but nothing else moved. "Commander Blackwood is with me. You saved his team in Korengal. We're here alone under no official orders." Still nothing. Blackwood scanned the tree line, the cabin, the small outbuildings. Every instinct told him they were being watched, assessed. Warren took another step forward. "I know about Berlin. I know you were betrayed. I'm here to make it right after all these years." The words hung in the air, then so subtle Blackwood almost missed it. Movement at the corner of the cabin. A figure stepped into view, rifle held casually but ready. A woman in her early 50s, her light brown hair now streaked with silver, wearing practical outdoor clothing. Her face was weathered by decades of exposure to the elements, but her eyes remained startlingly intense, alert, calculating, missing nothing. "Hello, Thunder," she said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly across the clearing. "It took you long enough." Warren stood very still. "Morgan, you're alive." A hint of a smile crossed her face. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated." "You've been busy," Warren replied. "Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, quite the guardian angel. Someone needs to watch over the children you send to war." Her gaze shifted to Blackwood. "Commander, you've recovered well from your Korengal adventure." Blackwood nodded. "Thanks to you. That shot through the enemy sniper's scope. Impossible by conventional standards." "Conventional standards never interested me much." She studied them both for another moment, then gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside. We have much to discuss." The interior of the cabin was Spartan but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, bookshelves another. Blackwood noted titles on advanced mathematics, ballistics, military history. A wooden table held maps and what appeared to be surveillance photographs. The furnishings were minimal but of high quality, built to last. Morgan secured her rifle on a wall rack containing an impressive collection of weapons, then moved to the stove where a pot of coffee simmered. "You'll forgive the security precautions," she said, pouring 3 cups. 30 years of habit are hard to break." "You knew we were coming," Warren observed. "I've been monitoring intelligence communications related to Artemis for decades. When your name appeared on secure channels after all these years, I knew someone had finally connected the dots. She handed them each a cup, then took a seat, gesturing for them to do the same. "How long have you been watching me?" Warren asked. "Since Berlin," she replied simply. "I needed to know who was involved, who could be trusted." "And your conclusion?" Her eyes met his directly. "Still forming. Your presence here is promising. The CIA involvement is not." "Hayes," Blackwood said. Morgan's gaze sharpened. "Carson Hayes is just a functionary. The real concern is who he reports to." "William Reynolds," Warren suggested. She nodded once. "Reynolds was deputy director for operations back then. Now he officially consults on special projects. In reality, he oversees cleanup of old Cold War operations that might embarrass the agency today." "Like Berlin." "Like Berlin," she confirmed, "and dozens of other operations where American assets were sacrificed for political expediency." Warren leaned forward. "What really happened that night, Morgan?" "All I received was a fragmentary after-action report. Blood evidence, signs of struggle, presumed KIA." Morgan's expression hardened. Her eyes took on a distant quality, seeing back through the decades. The mission parameters were legitimate, tracking former Stasi officers meeting with KGB hardliners. What wasn't in the briefing was that some of those same hardliners had been on our payroll for years. Reynolds had cultivated them as sources trading intelligence for protection, money, future considerations. "Double agents," Blackwood said. "Triple in some cases," Morgan corrected, "playing all sides." "When I arrived at the observation post, I found our advance team already dead. Professional work execution style. I proceeded anyway, gathered the intelligence as ordered. The meeting included discussions of financial transfers, billions siphoned from Soviet accounts in the confusion of the collapse. Money that officially didn't exist," Warren mused. "Money that certain individuals intended to use for personal empire building in the post-Soviet era. I documented everything, including conversations implicating American officials in the arrangements." She paused. "Including Reynolds." Warren's expression darkened. "So when you transmitted the intelligence, my position was compromised within minutes. A Russian hit team, Spetsnaz trained but operating privately, arrived at my extraction point. They knew exactly where to find me when I would be there." "You survived," Blackwood observed. Morgan's mouth formed a tight line. "Barely. I took 2 rounds to the chest, another through the shoulder. I managed to eliminate 3 of them before escaping into the sewers. Left enough blood behind to convince them I was dead. And then I went underground, literally at first, then figuratively, called in a favor from an old contact in Poland, received medical treatment off the books. By the time I recovered, the Soviet Union had collapsed entirely. New game, new players, but some of the old ones remained, including Reynolds." "Why not come and report what happened?" Blackwood asked. Morgan's laugh was short and without humor. "Report to whom? The same chain of command that had betrayed me. Reynolds had already filed reports establishing that the operation was compromised by my mistakes, that I had violated protocols and gotten myself killed." "You could have contacted me directly," Warren said quietly. Her eyes met his. "Could I? Reynolds was your superior too, Thunder. I didn't know how far the corruption extended, who else might be compromised. So I watched. I waited. I gathered evidence. For 30 years. The Cold War ended, but the players adapted. The money they siphoned financed operations across Eastern Europe, the Middle East, even domestically. I tracked it all, documented connections, built a case." She rose and moved to a secure cabinet, unlocking it with a complex sequence. From inside, she withdrew a portable hard drive. 3 decades of evidence, financial transfers, operations, assassinations disguised as accidents, political manipulations, all leading back to a small group of former intelligence officers from multiple countries who saw the end of the Cold War not as a conclusion but as an opportunity to establish personal fiefdoms beyond governmental oversight. Warren studied the hard drive. Reynolds. Reynolds is just one node in the network. There are others, former KGB, ex-Stasi, even MI6. They operate now through private security firms, investment companies, consulting agencies. All legitimate on the surface, all connected through the original Berlin operation. Blackwood's mind raced through implications. "This explains why you've remained hidden all these years. but not why you've been protecting American forces in combat zones. Morgan's expression softened slightly. I may have lost faith in certain individuals within our intelligence community, Commander, but never in the men and women who serve. My quarrel isn't with America or its soldiers. It's with those who betray them for personal gain. And now you're ready to come in from the cold, Warren said. Why now after all this time? Morgan returned to her seat. Because the network is vulnerable. Reynolds is preparing to transfer control to a new generation. The documentation must be transitioning as well. There's a window of opportunity to expose everything before the evidence disappears into new hands. Hayes sent us to assess whether you represent a threat or an asset, Blackwood said. I'm aware, Morgan replied dryly. I intercepted the communication. Warren shook his head, a hint of pride in his expression. Still 3 steps ahead. Always. She leaned forward. Hayes doesn't know what he's involved in. He's following orders, pursuing an agenda set by Reynolds, who wants to eliminate the final loose end from Berlin before he fully retires. You, Pam, Blackwood said. Morgan nodded. Me, the ghost who knows where all the bodies are buried. Warren considered this. The evidence you've gathered, it would implicate people still in positions of power. It would end careers, possibly lead to prosecutions. Certainly create significant scandal. Morgan's expression remained neutral. I didn't spend 30 years in the wilderness because I enjoy solitude thunder. I did it because the alternative was death, either quick at the hands of assassins or slow in some black site prison. And now you're willing to risk exposure, Blackwood observed. That suggests the circumstances have changed significantly. Morgan's eyes met his. Reynolds is dying. Pancreatic cancer stage 4. He has months at most. Before he goes, he's ensuring his legacy by eliminating loose ends and transferring his operation to trusted lieutenants, including Hayes. Hayes is directly involved, Warren asked, surprise evident in his voice. Not yet, but he's been groomed as a replacement, the perfect candidate, ambitious, skilled, unquestioning of authority. Once he's fully briefed on the network's true nature, he'll be compromised, unable to extricate himself without self-destruction. Blackwood exchanged glances with Warren. We need to move carefully. If Reynolds suspects we're on to him. He already suspects, Morgan interrupted. My recent activities were designed to draw attention, to force the issue before Reynolds completes the transition. It's why I left the message in Kringal, why I've been allowing glimpses of my existence. I needed to create enough of a pattern to bring someone trustworthy looking for me. You've been leaving breadcrumbs deliberately, Warren realized, setting up this meeting. Morgan nodded. Calculated risk. I needed to validate that you weren't part of Reynolds' network before making contact. Your actions since receiving the assignment have been encouraging. We haven't reported the Montana coordinates to Hayes, Blackwood confirmed. I know. You've been appropriately cautious while remaining mission-focused. It's why we're having this conversation. Warren studied his former student with a mixture of pride and concern. What exactly are you proposing, Morgan? She tapped the hard drive. A coordinated operation, using my evidence and your official access to expose the entire network simultaneously. No warning, no chance for them to cover tracks or eliminate witnesses. That puts you directly in the crosshairs, Blackwood pointed out. Morgan's smile was cold. I've been in crosshairs for 30 years, Commander. The difference now is I'll be able to shoot back officially. Warren rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. We'll need authorization beyond Hayes, direct to the director, possibly the Secretary of Defense. My thoughts exactly. Reynolds has influence, but not at that level. Not anymore. What about the evidence itself? Blackwood asked. How verifiable is it? Morgan moved to one of the bookshelves, sliding it aside to reveal a hidden room. Inside was an impressive array of communications equipment, computer systems, and file storage. Everything is documented, cross-referenced, and verified through multiple sources. Financial records authenticated by banking experts under false pretenses. Communications intercepted using methods I developed after leaving service. Witness testimonies recorded without their knowledge. Blackwood whistled softly. You've been busy. I've had time, she replied simply, and motivation. Warren walked into the hidden room, examining the setup with expert eyes. This goes beyond anything we trained you for. I adapted, evolved. When your only mission for 30 years is survival and justice, you develop new skills. Warren turned to face her. You should have contacted me sooner. For the first time, Morgan's composure wavered slightly. I wanted to, many times. But until I had everything, until I could prove beyond doubt what had happened coming forward, would have been suicide. I needed to be a ghost, completely deniable, officially dead. And the operational support for American forces, Blackwood asked. The shots that saved my team and others. Her expression softened. Call it maintaining my skills while serving my country in the only way available to me. I may have been officially dead, but I never stopped being an American operator. Warren nodded, slowly, understanding. Morgan Stevens had found a way to continue her service, to protect American soldiers while remaining hidden from those who would silence her. It was both impressive and heartbreaking. Decades of isolation, of watching from shadows, unable to claim recognition or connection. We have a problem, Blackwood said after a moment. Hayes expects regular updates. He'll grow suspicious if we maintain radio silence much longer. Morgan considered this. Then we give him an update, just not the one he's expecting. What do you suggest? Warren asked. Controlled information. Tell him you have discovered evidence I may have survived Berlin, but have been operating outside the country. Suggest following leads in Eastern Europe. That gives us time to approach the director directly with my evidence. Warren frowned. Reynolds will have contingencies, people watching the director, monitoring communications. Which is why we don't use official channels, Morgan replied. We use the network I've established. Independent, secure, and visible to standard monitoring. She moved to a map on the wall indicating locations marked with small pins. These are secure contact points, individuals who owe me favors, who operate outside official structures but have connections to legitimate authority. Through them, we can reach the director without alerting Reynolds. Blackwood studied the map, impressed by the thoroughness of her planning. You've prepared for this moment for a long time. I've had little else to do, she said simply. When justice is your only remaining purpose, you become very focused. Warren placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture unexpectedly gentle from the hardened soldier. I should have looked deeper. Should have questioned the official reports. Morgan shook her head. You couldn't have known. Reynolds was careful, thorough. The evidence was constructed perfectly. Still, but Warren insisted, you were my responsibility, my student. And you taught me well, she countered. Well enough to survive when everything went wrong, to maintain my mission through decades of isolation. Blackwood watched this exchange, understanding the complex emotions behind it. Warren had believed his finest student, dead for 30 years, had accepted a narrative that now proved false. Morgan had survived, continued her service in shadow while carrying the burden of betrayal by the very organization to which she'd pledged her loyalty. We need to move quickly, Blackwood said. Reynolds will already be suspicious about our investigation. If he connects us to Montana. He won't, Morgan assured him. I've maintained this location with extreme operational security. No electronic signature, no supply chain vulnerabilities, nothing that could be traced. You're confident. I'm alive, she replied simply. That's evidence of my confidence. Warren nodded. We'll need to divide responsibilities. Blackwood, you maintain contact with Hayes, feed him the Eastern Europe narrative. I'll activate some old contacts people Reynolds wouldn't think to monitor. Morgan, prepare your evidence for presentation, the most damning, irrefutable pieces first. Already done, she said, handing him a small flash drive. This contains enough to justify a full investigation. The rest follows once we have proper security protocols in place. Blackwood checked his watch. Hayes will expect contact within 3 hours. Then we'd better get moving, Warren said. Morgan, can you secure this location? We may need to return. She nodded. I have protocols for rapid evacuation. Nothing will remain that could be traced. As they prepared to depart, Blackwood found himself studying Morgan Stevens more carefully. This woman had survived against impossible odds, maintained her mission for decades without support or recognition, and developed skills beyond even her exceptional training. She was both a ghost from the past and a force very much present, a living legend who had chosen shadows over compromise. That shot in Korengal, he said as they gathered equipment, through the enemy sniper's scope at 500 yards. How did you make that calculation? Morgan paused, a rare smile warming her features. Mathematics, Commander. The universe has patterns. Wind temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, they're all variables in an equation. Solve the equation correctly and the bullet goes exactly where it should. Most snipers use ballistic computers for shots half that distance. Most snipers didn't have a mother who taught calculus while their father taught hunting, she replied. Talents are born, not made. Blackwood nodded, understanding something fundamental about her. Morgan Stevens wasn't just a highly trained operative. She was a unique convergence of genetics, education, and circumstance. The perfect precision instrument honed through decades of solitary practice. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Morgan retrieved a rifle case from beneath a hidden floor panel. The case was weathered clearly, having traveled many miles. She opened it briefly, checking the custom-built precision rifle within, the same weapon Blackwood had glimpsed through his scope in Afghanistan. Old friend, and he asked. Morgan nodded. Custom Macmillan TAC 338. Been with me since I went underground. 2,300 confirmed interventions in 16 countries. Interventions, Warren noted with raised eyebrows. Interesting terminology. Precision application of force to alter undesirable outcomes, she clarified. Not all interventions were lethal. Sometimes changing the equation requires only a warning shot in the right place. In Korengal, Blackwood asked. That was personal, she admitted. I don't usually engage directly with American operations unless lives are immediately at risk. Too much possibility of exposure. But your team was walking into a professionally planned ambush. Someone with significant training had prepared that kill zone. Someone connected to Reynolds' network. Possibly, the pattern matched certain contracted operations I've tracked over the years. Professional mercenaries with specialized training, often former special forces from various nations. They operate through security companies with legitimate fronts. Warren frowned. You think Reynolds has been targeting American forces? Not as policy, Morgan clarified, but his network sometimes aligns with interests opposed to official American operations. The money follows opportunity, not loyalty. The implications were disturbing. If Morgan's assessment was accurate, Reynolds and his associates represented something beyond mere corruption, a shadow operation that occasionally worked against American interests when profit dictated. We move now, Warren decided. Blackwood contact Hayes from the road. Feed him the Eastern Europe narrative. I'll reach out to my contact at the Pentagon. Morgan, I'll disappear again, she said simply. But not far. Monitoring frequency Alpha 37 if you need emergency contact. The old Artemis emergency channel, Warren noted with approval. No one would think to monitor that ancient frequency. As they left the cabin, Morgan activated a series of hidden protocols, systems shutting down evidence being secured or destroyed. Within minutes, the cabin would appear long abandoned to any casual observer. One more question, Blackwood said as they prepared to separate. Why the messages? Why sign your interventions with MS if you wanted to remain hidden? Morgan shouldered her rifle case, her expression unreadable. Perhaps even ghosts need to leave some mark on the world, Commander. Some proof they existed. Or perhaps I was testing the waters, seeing who might eventually come looking. And now that we have, her eyes met his, decades of isolation and purpose visible in their depths. Now we finish what began in Berlin. We bring the truth to light regardless of the cost. As Morgan vanished into the forest with practiced ease, Blackwood turned to Warren. You believe her. All of it. Warren watched the tree line where his former student had disappeared. Morgan Stevens never lied to me. Not once in all the years I trained her. If she says Reynolds betrayed her, betrayed his country, I believe her. Then we have a significant problem. Reynolds has decades of influence connections throughout the intelligence community, and Hayes is his protege. Warren nodded grimly, which is why we proceed exactly as Morgan suggested. Limited contact with Hayes, approach the director through back channels, present the evidence directly. And if Reynolds realizes what we're doing, the old colonel checked his sidearm with practiced efficiency, then we'll discover just how good his private contractors really are. They began the hike back to their vehicle, both men acutely aware that they had crossed a line. Whatever happened next, there would be no returning to simple assignments and clear chains of command. They had aligned themselves with a ghost against enemies hiding within the very institutions they had sworn to serve. The Montana wilderness seemed to close behind them, secrets kept within its vastness. Somewhere in those trees, Morgan Stevens moved like the ghost she had become, 30 years of purpose driving her forward. The woman who could make impossible shots, who had survived betrayal and isolation, who had protected American forces from shadows. The hunter had become the hunted. But in this case, the hunter had 3 decades of preparation skills beyond conventional measurement and the cold certainty of someone with nothing left to lose. The secure communications room at Langley hummed with the sound of advanced electronics. Carson Hayes studied the satellite imagery on the main screen, his expression revealing nothing as analysts highlighted various locations across Eastern Europe. "These are the reported sightings that match the parameters, sir," a young analyst explained. "Female age-appropriate advanced marksmanship capabilities. Most promising is this shooting competition in Prague 3 months ago. Competitor registered under the name Marina Sokolova, but disappeared before the awards ceremony, despite winning first place." Hayes studied the grainy security footage. The woman moved with military precision, her handling of the rifle showing years of professional training. The face was partially obscured by a cap and shooting glasses, but the build and posture were consistent with Morgan Stevens' profile. Tracker movements from Prague. Credit cards, transportation accommodation. "Already attempted, sir. She paid cash for everything used, no traceable identification. The competition required only a passport check, not retention of records." Hayes nodded unsurprised. If this was indeed Morgan Stevens, she had maintained her operational security for decades. She wouldn't make amateur mistakes. His secure phone vibrated. "Blackwood, about time." "Hayes," he answered, stepping away from the analyst. "We have a lead." Blackwood's voice came through clearly, despite the encryption. "Evidence suggests Stevens may have survived Berlin after all. We're tracking movement patterns through Eastern Europe over the past decade." Hayes frowned slightly. "Convenient timing, Commander. We've just identified a possible sighting in Prague." A brief pause. "That aligns with our intelligence. We believe she's been moving between former Soviet bloc countries, maintaining connections established during her Artemis operations." "Your current location?" "En route to Warsaw. Colonel Warren has contacts there from the old days, people who might recognize Stevens if she's been active in the region." Hayes made a note. "Keep me updated regularly. I want daily reports regardless of findings." "Understood. Be advised our communications may be intermittent depending on location." After ending the call, Hayes returned to the analysis team. "Focus resources on Eastern Europe, particularly Poland and the Czech Republic. And get me everything we have on Colonel Warren's Cold War contacts in the region." As the team dispersed to their assignments, Hayes moved to a private office and entered a complex security code on a specialized phone. After several encryption handshakes, a voice answered. "Yes. They're following the Eastern Europe trail," Hayes reported. "Warren is leveraging his old network." "As expected," the voice replied. "William Reynolds technically retired, but still wielding considerable influence." "And the cabin in Montana?" Hayes frowned. "Montana." They reported no such location. Awaited silence. "Interesting. Our surveillance detected their aircraft landing in Helena yesterday. Vehicle rental records show they traveled west into the mountains. Satellite imagery was inconclusive due to tree cover." "They concealed this from me." Hayes realized irritation evident in his voice. "Of course they did," Reynolds replied calmly. "Warren was never a fool. He's testing waters, seeing how we react. The Eastern Europe narrative is a distraction." "Should we bring them in for questioning?" "No, let them believe their deception is working. Deploy the surveillance team to Montana immediately. Find whatever they discovered there. And if they make contact with Stevens," Reynolds' voice hardened, "then you eliminate the problem permanently. All 3 of them." "Warren is a decorated officer. Blackwood commands significant respect within naval special warfare. Eliminating them would raise serious questions." "Questions can be managed. Operational hazards occur in sensitive investigations. Accidents happen." Hayes absorbed this directive. He had suspected Reynolds' interest in the Stevens case went beyond standard procedure, but the willingness to eliminate active American military personnel represented a significant escalation. "Understood," he replied finally. "I'll handle it personally." After ending the call, Hayes sat motionless for several minutes, weighing implications and options. His career had been built on loyalty, on following directives without question. Reynolds had been his mentor, had guided his advancement through the ranks of the CI, but this assignment was rapidly evolving beyond normal parameters. He accessed a secure database, entering credentials that few knew he possessed. The file that appeared was heavily redacted, but contained more information on Morgan Stevens than the official records. Berlin, the mission parameters, the aftermath. Reading between redactions, Hayes began to understand why Reynolds considered Stevens such a significant threat. She knew something worth killing for even 30 years later. Meanwhile, deep in the Montana forest, a surveillance team advanced cautiously toward the coordinates extracted from Blackwood's vehicle rental GPS. 6 men, all former Special Forces operators, now employed by a private security firm with close ties to retired intelligence officials. Their equipment was state-of-the-art, but untraceable to any government agency. Their orders were explicit: locate evidence of Morgan Stevens' document, everything, eliminate any resistance. They moved with professional precision through the wilderness, maintaining communications discipline, leaving minimal sign of their passage. These were experienced operators, men who had conducted similar missions across the world, always deniable, always successful. What they didn't realize was that they were already being watched. From her position, high in a pine tree, Morgan Stevens tracked their movement through a specialized scope. Her breathing remained steady, her body completely still, despite the uncomfortable perch. She had anticipated this response, had prepared for it methodically. The cabin was a calculated risk, a necessary meeting point, but she had never intended to remain there after making contact with Warren and Blackwood. Now she observed the consequences of that decision, analyzing the approaching team with professional detachment. Their movement patterns, equipment, and tactical formation told her everything she needed to know. Reynolds had deployed serious assets rapidly, which confirmed her assessment of his concern. These weren't standard CIA field operatives. They were private contractors, deniable assets for operations the agency couldn't officially sanction. Through her earpiece, she monitored their encrypted communications, easily intercepted by equipment she had developed specifically for this purpose. Their confidence was evident, their experience clear in their methodical approach. Under different circumstances, she might have respected their professionalism. Morgan shifted her position slightly, refocusing her scope on the team leader. His face wasn't familiar, but his movement patterns suggested Delta Force training, probably within the last decade. The others showed similar military backgrounds, special operations veterans now working in the private sector. They weren't responsible for Berlin, for the betrayal that had defined her life. They were simply tools, extensions of Reynolds' will. Morgan considered her options carefully. These men represented a threat, but they were also American veterans following what they believed were legitimate orders. Eliminating them would be simple from her position, but unnecessary and contrary to her principles. Instead, she reached for a small device attached to her belt. With practiced efficiency, she adjusted settings and activated the transmission. Throughout the forest, carefully placed speakers activated simultaneously, broadcasting recorded sounds, movement through underbrushes from multiple directions, radio chatter in Russian, the distinctive sound of weapons being readied. The surveillance team reacted immediately, dropping into defensive positions, weapons scanning for threats. Their communication became more urgent as they attempted to assess the apparently imminent ambush. Morgan allowed herself a small smile as she activated the second phase of her countermeasure. Smoke canisters, positioned days earlier in anticipation of exactly this scenario, began releasing dense white clouds, obscuring visibility throughout the area. The team's thermal imaging would be rendered useless by heating elements placed strategically among the trees. As confusion spread through the surveillance team, Morgan descended from her position and moved silently through the forest. Her goal wasn't to engage, but to gather intelligence, specifically confirmation of who had deployed these assets. This team's communications equipment, signatures, and operational patterns would provide valuable evidence connecting Reynolds to extra-legal operations on American soil. The team leader, struggling to maintain control of the deteriorating situation, made a critical decision. Fall back to extraction point, area possibly compromised by hostile forces, possible Russian presence. Morgan nodded with satisfaction as she recorded his transmission. The Russian distraction was particularly effective, playing into existing intelligence community concerns about foreign operations on American soil. The surveillance team would report this encounter exactly as she had engineered it, creating confusion and misdirection that would buy valuable time. As the team executed a tactical withdrawal, Morgan recovered her countermeasure devices, leaving no evidence of her presence. Within an hour, the force would appear completely normal, with no indication of the psychological operation that had just unfolded. The surveillance team would find the cabin empty, wiped clean of evidence, another dead end in their pursuit of the ghost. Hundreds of miles away in a secure hotel suite in Washington, D.C., Blackwood and Warren reviewed the encrypted message that had appeared on their secure tablet. She anticipated the surveillance team, Warren said with grudging admiration, created the impression of Russian operatives in the area. Blackwood nodded. Effective distraction. Hayes will be forced to investigate the potential foreign incursion diverting resources from the primary search. Morgan always understood misdirection better than anyone I trained, creating the perception of a larger, more immediate threat to mask her actual movements. Meanwhile, we proceed with approaching the director. Warren nodded. My contact confirmed a meeting tomorrow at 0800. Completely off books at a private residence in Virginia. No electronic devices, no records, just 20 minutes to make our case. Blackwood considered this. Reynolds will have surveillance on the director, standard protection protocols, which is why we're not going directly. My contact has arranged a diversionary appointment in the director's official schedule. While security is focused there, we'll be meeting him at a secondary location. Risky. Necessary, Warren countered. Reynolds has too much influence within normal channels. This is our only chance to present Morgan's evidence without interference. Blackwood's phone vibrated with an incoming message. Hayes again. Surveillance team reports possible Russian presence near the Montana coordinates. He read aloud. They're requesting additional resources and counterintelligence support. Warren chuckled softly. Morgan's handiwork. She's creating layers of confusion, buying us time. Hayes is requesting our immediate return to assist with the investigation, which would remove us from Washington just as we're scheduled to meet the director. Convenient. Blackwood composed a careful response maintaining their Eastern Europe cover story while acknowledging the Montana situation. I've told him we're following critical leads that can't be abandoned, but we'll provide remote consultation on the Russian angle. Good. Keep him engaged but distant. The longer we can maintain the illusion that we're pursuing their preferred narrative, the better our chances of reaching the director unimpeded. Blackwood studied the operational timeline they had developed. What's your assessment of our probability of success? Warren considered this seriously. With Morgan's evidence assuming we reach the director without interference, 70%. Sufficient to initiate an official investigation that even Reynolds couldn't completely suppress. And if Reynolds realizes what we're doing before we reach the director, the old colonel's expression hardened. Then our survival probability drops significantly. Reynolds has resources beyond official channels operators who handle problems permanently. We've seen his willingness to deploy them already. We need a contingency plan. We have one, Warren replied, indicating a sealed envelope on the table. Morgan provided details of a secure location accessible only with specific authentication. If our approach to the director fails, if Reynolds moves against us directly, we proceed there immediately. Blackwood picked up the envelope, weighing its significance. You trust her completely. I do, Warren confirmed without hesitation. Morgan Stevens was the finest operator I ever trained. Her loyalty was never to individuals or even to agencies, but to the principles they were meant to uphold. If she spent 30 years gathering evidence against Reynolds and his network, that evidence will be meticulous, irrefutable, and deadly to anyone implicated. Yes, which is precisely why Reynolds wants her eliminated. She represents the most significant threat to his legacy, to the shadow empire he's built since the Cold War ended. As night fell over Washington, the pieces continued moving on the invisible chessboard. Hayes deployed additional surveillance teams, his suspicions growing about Warren and Blackwood's true activities. Reynolds activated contingency protocols, placing assets near key locations throughout the capital. And somewhere in the shadows, Morgan Stevens continued her methodical preparations for the endgame she had planned for decades. The ghost was no longer fleeing, she was hunting. And her targets had no idea how completely she had prepared for this moment. Dawn broke over Washington, D.C., painting the monuments in soft golden light. Thunder Warren adjusted his tie, the formal attire feeling strange after days in field clothing. Beside him, Commander Blackwood checked his watch for the third time in as many minutes. We need to move, Blackwood said quietly. Security rotation changes at 0700. Warren nodded, gathering the slim briefcase containing Morgan's flash drive and supporting documentation. Their window of opportunity was narrow, a 20-minute gap between the director's official schedule and a classified briefing at the Pentagon. Remember, Warren cautioned as they left their hotel through a service entrance, Reynolds will have surveillance on all standard routes to the meeting location. We follow Morgan's protocol exactly. They entered a waiting taxi, not the one they had ordered through the hotel. This vehicle had appeared precisely as Morgan had indicated it would, driver matching the description provided in her instructions. No words were exchanged as they entered. The driver simply nodded once and pulled into morning traffic. Three-vehicle surveillance team on our 6 Blackwood, noted, watching the side mirror. Black sedan, silver SUV, motorcycle. Warren didn't turn to look. Expected. Morgan's route accounts for it. The taxi made a series of turns through the city, each one carefully calculated. At a busy intersection, they exited rapidly while the light was still red, immediately entering a coffee shop with a rear exit. Through the kitchen, into an alley, then into a waiting service van for the Smithsonian. Museum staff uniforms in the back, the new driver informed them, a woman with the efficient movements of military training. As they changed, Blackwood studied their driver. You're one of Morgan's contacts. I owe her my life, the woman replied simply. Helmand Province, 2013. I was Army intelligence pinned down after an operation went bad. Official extraction was impossible. She appeared from nowhere, created a diversion that allowed me to escape. She's been building this network for decades, Warren observed. People she's saved, people who understand what she's fighting against. We're scattered throughout government, military, private sector. No official connection, no traceable communication, just readiness to help when called. The van delivered them to the service entrance of the Air and Space Museum. From there, they followed a complex route through maintenance corridors, emerging into the National Mall, where they blended with early morning tourists. Final approach, Warren murmured as they walked casually toward the Lincoln Memorial. Director's security will have established a perimeter. Which is why we're not going directly to the meeting location, Blackwood noted. They entered the memorial, joining a small tour group. Their guide, an elderly man discussing Lincoln's legacy with practiced enthusiasm, made brief eye contact with Warren. During a moment when the other tourists were taking photographs, he slipped them a small device. Service elevator, he whispered. 3 minutes. The maintenance area beneath the memorial connected to tunnels rarely used by the public. Following Morgan's precise directions, they navigated the underground network until reaching a nondescript door, requiring the keycard they had been given. Beyond lay a small conference room where a single man waited, Director James Harrington, 30-year veteran of the intelligence community, current head of the CIA. Colonel Warren, he acknowledged. Commander Blackwood, this meeting isn't happening, understood? Understood, sir, they replied in unison. Harrington's expression was grim. You have 15 minutes to explain why I'm violating multiple protocols to meet with you and why I shouldn't have you both detained immediately for operating outside your authorized parameters. Warren placed the flash drive on the table. Because Morgan Stevens is alive, sir, and she has evidence of treason reaching back 30 years. Harrington's expression didn't change, but his posture stiffened slightly. Morgan Stevens died in Berlin in 1991. I read the file myself. No, sir. She survived, went underground, and has spent 3 decades documenting the activities of a network operating within our intelligence services. A network that betrayed her and has been working against American interests when convenient for their private gain. That's an extraordinary claim, Colonel. With extraordinary evidence, Warren replied, nodding toward the drive, including financial records, communication intercepts, and operational documentation, linking former Deputy Director William Reynolds to illegal operations spanning 3 decades. Harrington considered this. Reynolds has an impeccable record. On paper, Blackwood interjected, but the evidence suggests he's been running a shadow operation since the Berlin incident, using agency resources and connections for private enterprise. And this evidence comes from a woman officially dead for 30 years, Harrington noted skeptically. A woman who, if alive, has been operating as an unauthorized vigilante. A woman who saved my team in Afghanistan with the most remarkable shot I've ever witnessed, Blackwood countered, who has protected American forces repeatedly while gathering evidence against those who betrayed her. Harrington leaned forward. Even if what you're saying is true, bringing in a rogue operator who's spent decades outside the system presents significant complications. More complicated than a network of former intelligence officers selling American secrets and occasionally targeting our forces when profit dictates, Warren asked quietly. The director's eyes narrowed. Those are serious accusations, Uktis. Documented on that drive, Warren confirmed, including evidence that Reynolds recently deployed private contractors against us on American soil in Montana. This caught Harrington's attention. Explain. Warren outlined their meeting with Morgan, the evidence she had provided, and the surveillance team that had followed. As he spoke, Harrington's expression gradually shifted from skepticism to concern. If this is verified, he said finally, it represents one of the most significant counterintelligence issues in decades. Which is why we came directly to you, Blackwood replied. The normal channels are compromised. Harrington studied them both for a long moment, his decades of experience evident in his measuring gaze. I'll review this evidence personally, verify what can be verified quickly. Where is Stevens now? Secure, Warren answered. She'll remain that way until we determine it's safe for her to come in. And if I order you to bring her in immediately, with respect, sir, we would have to decline that order, Warren said calmly. Morgan Stevens has survived 30 years because she understands operational security better than anyone I've ever trained. She'll reveal herself when she's confident the threat has been neutralized. Harrington leaned back, a hint of a smile crossing his face. You've already gone rogue for her, haven't you, both of you? Careers, oaths, protocols, all secondary to protecting this woman and her evidence. To protecting the truth, Blackwood corrected. And yes, sir, we have. Because you believe her completely. Because we've verified enough of her evidence to know she's telling the truth, Warren replied. And because Morgan Stevens never broke faith with her country, even when her country broke faith with her. The director nodded slowly. How do I contact you after I've reviewed this? Warren placed a secure phone on the table. One-time use. Morgan's protocol. Of course it is, Harrington muttered. 24 hours. I'll need at least that to verify the most critical elements. Reynolds will know something's happening, Blackwood cautioned. He's already suspicious of our activities. I'm quite capable of managing William Reynolds, Harrington assured them. He may have built his shadow empire, but I've spent my career watching for exactly this kind of operation. Your concerns about his reach are noted, but perhaps overestimated. Warren and Blackwood exchanged glances, both recognizing the director's confidence might be misplaced. Reynolds had survived and thrived for decades by anticipating threats and eliminating them before they materialized. His network extended beyond what even the director might suspect. 24 hours, Warren agreed. Then we need to move regardless of verification status. Reynolds won't wait once he senses the danger. As they prepared to leave through separate exits, Harrington asked one final question. This woman Stevens, after 30 years in the cold, what does she want? Revenge, recognition, restoration? Warren considered this. Justice, sir. Nothing more, nothing less. A rare commodity, the director observed. Let's hope it's not extinct. Blackwood and Warren departed through the underground tunnels following Morgan's exfiltration route back to the surface. Neither spoke until they had cleared the likely surveillance perimeter, emerging near the tidal basin where cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom. He believed us, Blackwood noted, but he's still skeptical about Morgan. Understandable, Warren replied. From his perspective, she's an unknown variable, potentially unstable, after decades of isolation. What he doesn't understand is that the isolation was her strength, not her weakness. It gave her the distance to see patterns, connections that would be invisible from within the system. Warren nodded in agreement. Morgan always had that ability, seeing the larger picture, understanding how seemingly unrelated events connected. It's what made her exceptional as an operator. And dangerous to people like Reynolds. Precisely. Which is why we need to proceed, assuming Reynolds already knows we've met with the director. His surveillance net is too comprehensive for us to have escaped notice completely. Blackwood checked the secure phone Morgan had provided. No contact yet. She'll reach out when necessary. Meanwhile, we maintain the Eastern Europe fiction for Hayes. As they walked, Warren suddenly stopped, his experienced eyes catching something most would miss. Gray sedan western perimeter. Same vehicle has passed twice. Blackwood casually scanned the area. Multiple teams, professional deployment, not standard agency surveillance. Reynolds is private contractors, Warren confirmed. We need to split up. Harder to track two separate targets. Rendezvous. The fallback location Morgan provided. 6 hours. They separated smoothly, each taking routes designed to identify and potentially lose surveillance. Warren, despite his age, moved with the practiced efficiency of a lifetime in covert operations, using the urban environment to his advantage. Metro stations, crowded shopping areas, service entrances to government buildings where his credentials still granted access. Blackwood employed his naval special warfare training, creating multiple false trails, doubling back unexpectedly, using reflective surfaces to spot followers without directly looking for them. Both men had spent careers at evading hostile forces in foreign territories. Doing so in Washington, D.C. presented different challenges, but relied on the same fundamental principles. What neither fully appreciated was that their pursuers weren't simply following orders. They were executing a carefully designed containment operation developed by a man with decades of experience eliminating threats. Across town in a private office, unmarked on any official directory, William Reynolds studied the real-time surveillance feeds with cold precision. At 74, his body showed the inevitable effects of age, but his mind remained razor-sharp, analyzing information with the same ruthless efficiency that had allowed him to survive the brutal politics of the intelligence world. They met with Harrington, he observed to Hayes, who stood attentively nearby. Exactly as predicted. Our assets couldn't penetrate the secure meeting location, Hayes reported. Content unknown. Reynolds waved this away as irrelevant. They presented Stevens' evidence, whatever that might be. Harrington will review it and attempt verification through trusted channels. Should we intervene with the director? Unnecessary. Harrington is cautious, methodical. Verification will take time. Meanwhile, our priority is locating Stevens herself. She's the linchpin. Hayes frowned slightly. Our surveillance teams have found no trace of her. If she's been operating independently for decades, her tradecraft will be exceptional. Everyone leaves traces, Reynolds countered. Everyone has patterns, habits, weaknesses. Stevens is human despite her reputation. He manipulated the surveillance feed, bringing up a map of tracked movements. Warren and Blackwood have separated, attempting to evade our teams. Predictable. They'll rendezvous at a location Stevens provided. We could apprehend them now, Hayes suggested. Reynolds shook his head. Too public, too many potential witnesses. Besides, they're more valuable as unwitting guides. They'll lead us to Stevens. And then we eliminate the problem permanently. All three of them. Reynolds' voice carried the certainty of someone who had made similar decisions countless times. Arrange the narrative: rogue operations, unauthorized contact with foreign assets, tragic but necessary intervention. Hayes absorbed this directive, his expression revealing nothing. Throughout his career, he had followed Reynolds' guidance without question. The older man had been his mentor, his pathway through the complex politics of the agency. But recent revelations had created uncomfortable questions. The Montana surveillance team reported what appeared to be Russian operators in the area, Hayes noted. Could Stevens have foreign support? Reynolds smiled thinly. There were no Russians in Montana. That was Stevens creating misdirection exactly as she was trained to do. One of her more impressive skills, even back then. You knew her well. I recruited her initially, Reynolds confirmed, before Warren took over her training. Morgan Stevens was exceptional, perhaps the most naturally gifted operator I've ever encountered. Her only weakness was an unfortunate idealism, an inability to understand how the world actually works, which led to Berlin. Reynolds' expression hardened momentarily. Berlin was regrettable, but necessary. The Cold War was ending. New arrangements were required. Stevens discovered aspects of those arrangements prematurely before she could understand their importance. And now she's spent 30 years building a case against you. Against a phantom, Reynolds corrected. Whatever evidence she believes she has, it's circumstantial at best. Connections and coincidences rather than proof. Harrington might be concerned initially, but ultimately he'll recognize the rambling obsessions of a woman who spent decades in isolation. Hayes wasn't entirely convinced. She convinced Warren and Blackwood. Both are experienced, decorated officers with impeccable records. Warren is sentimental about his former student. Blackwood is grateful because she saved his life. Emotion clouding judgment, a common failing even among otherwise rational men. Reynolds turned from the surveillance feeds. Continue tracking them. When they rendezvous, we'll have the location of Stevens' safe house. Deploy the operational team, but maintain distance until all three targets are confirmed present. Understood. As Hayes left to implement these instructions, Reynolds remained seated, his mind calculating probabilities and contingencies as he had done throughout his long career. Morgan Stevens had been a ghost for 30 years, operating in shadows, gathering evidence against him and the network he had carefully constructed. That she had survived it all was testament to her abilities. That she had chosen now to resurface suggested she believed she had finally assembled enough evidence to destroy him. Perhaps she had, it didn't matter. In the world Reynolds inhabited, evidence was only dangerous when presented through official channels by credible sources. A woman officially dead for 3 decades, operating without authorization, presenting documentation of unknown provenance. Such a source could be discredited, their evidence dismissed. First, however, the ghost needed to be exorcised permanently. Morgan Stevens had been allowed to haunt the shadows for too long. It was time to end the Berlin operation once and for all. Across the city, in a small apartment overlooking the Anacostia River, Morgan Stevens monitored encrypted communications through equipment that represented 3 decades of technological evolution. Her system intercepted and decoded transmissions that its creators believed unbreakable, providing real-time intelligence on Reynolds' operation. "They're tracking both of them," she noted to the woman seated across from her, the same driver who had transported Warren and Blackwood earlier. "Multiple teams, standard containment protocol." "Should we extract them?" the woman asked. Morgan considered this. "Not yet. Reynolds expects them to lead his teams to me. We'll use that expectation." "They're at risk." "Both men understand operational hazards," Morgan replied, "and both are skilled enough to maintain distance from immediate capture." She adjusted settings on her equipment, bringing up a different set of communications. "The director is already initiating verification protocols on the evidence, moving faster than Reynolds anticipated." "Is that good or bad?" "Both," Morgan said thoughtfully. "It accelerates our timeline, which limits preparation. But it also forces Reynolds to react more quickly, potentially making mistakes." "You've planned for this moment for 30 years. Isn't everything prepared?" Morgan smiled slightly, the expression softening her weathered features. "No plan survives contact with reality, Melissa. I've developed contingencies, alternatives, fallback positions. But ultimately, this comes down to Reynolds' reaction once he realizes the extent of the evidence against him. And if he reacts with maximum force, then we respond accordingly." Morgan's voice carried absolute certainty. "I didn't spend 3 decades in the wilderness to fail at the final moment." She returned her attention to the monitoring equipment. Warren and Blackwood were executing their evasion protocols effectively, creating confusion among the surveillance teams. Reynolds would adapt, of course. He always did. But the delay provided valuable time for the director to begin verification of the most damning evidence. The trap was baited. The players were moving into position, and the ghost who had haunted William Reynolds for 30 years was preparing for her final mission. Sunset painted the Potomac in fiery orange as Blackwood approached the rendezvous point, an abandoned boathouse on the Virginia side of the river. After hours of evasive movement, he was reasonably confident he had shed surveillance, but experience had taught him never to assume success when dealing with professional operatives. The boathouse appeared deserted, weathered wood, and broken windows, suggesting years of neglect. Perfect cover for a clandestine meeting. Blackwood approached cautiously, checking sightlines and potential observation points before making his final approach. Inside, Warren was already waiting, his expression grim in the fading light. "Trouble?" Blackwood asked immediately. "Reynolds has accelerated his timetable," the colonel replied. "3 of my former contacts have been detained for questioning in the past hour. He's burning assets, eliminating potential verification sources for the director." "How would you know that already?" "Because I received this," Warren said, holding up a secure tablet. "From Morgan. She's been monitoring internal communications. Reynolds has deployed operational teams to at least 5 locations connected to Berlin. He's cleaning house." Blackwood absorbed this information. The director must have begun verification immediately, faster than Reynolds expected. Which forces his hand. He can't allow corroborating evidence or testimony to reach official channels. "Where's Morgan now?" Warren gestured toward the tablet. "She's arranged transport for us. We meet her at a secure location, then proceed directly to the director with additional evidence. Hayes will have flagged all transportation options: airports, train stations, rental agencies. Morgan's network operates beyond standard monitoring. The transportation is already arranged." As if on cue, they heard the low rumble of a boat engine approaching. Through the broken windows, they saw a weathered fishing vessel making its way toward the dilapidated dock. "Our ride," Warren confirmed. The boat captain, an older man with the weathered features of someone who had spent a lifetime on the water, nodded in greeting as they boarded. "Below deck," he said simply. "We cast off immediately." The cabin beneath the main deck had been converted into a secure communications center. Multiple monitors displayed surveillance feeds, communication intercepts, and real-time tracking of various vehicles throughout the DC area. "Morgan's setup?" Blackwood asked. Warren nodded. "She's created her own intelligence network over the years. People who owe her favors technology she's developed independently." "Impressive." "Necessary," came a voice from behind them. Morgan Stevens stood in the doorway dressed in practical tactical clothing, her custom rifle case at her feet. "Reynolds' reach extends throughout conventional systems. The only safe approach is to operate completely outside them." She moved to the central console, bringing up additional feeds. "The director has initiated verification of the key evidence. 3 former operatives connected to Berlin have been contacted. Reynolds is already moving to contain them." "Can the director protect them?" Blackwood asked. "Not all. Reynolds' network includes private security contractors with no official connection to the agency. They're already deployed." Morgan highlighted several moving vehicles on the displays. "These teams operate under private authority completely deniable." "What's our next move?" Warren asked. "Direct approach," Morgan replied. "Reynolds expects us to remain in hiding, to operate from shadows. Instead, we go straight to Langley." Both men stared at her in surprise. "Langley," Blackwood repeated. "That's Reynolds' stronghold." "Precisely why he won't expect it," Morgan explained. "Security protocols, access controls, surveillance systems, all designed to keep threats out. But they also create a false sense of security for those inside." "You have a way in," Warren stated rather than asked. "I've maintained access credentials through various means. More importantly, I have detailed knowledge of the building's security blind spots areas where surveillance coverage is incomplete or compromised." "Sounds like a suicide mission," Blackwood observed. Morgan's expression remained calm. "It would be for anyone else. But I've spent 30 years preparing for this specific scenario. Every security upgrade, every protocol change, every personnel rotation, I've tracked them all." "To what end?" Warren asked. "What exactly do you plan to do once inside Banton? Access the secure server containing Reynolds' private files. Material too sensitive for normal channels kept in a closed system within Langley itself. The final evidence connecting him directly to Berlin, to the subsequent operations to the network he's built. That server would be protected by the agency's most sophisticated security," Blackwood noted. "It is," Morgan confirmed. "Which is why I've spent years developing countermeasures specifically for those systems." Warren studied his former student with a mixture of concern and pride. "You've devoted your entire life to this moment." "I've devoted my life to justice," she corrected. "To ensuring that those who betrayed their oaths, who sacrificed operatives for personal gain, who built empires on the bodies of loyal agents, that they face consequences for those actions." The intensity in her voice was controlled, but unmistakable. This wasn't mere revenge, it was something deeper, more principled. Morgan Stevens had maintained her core values through decades of isolation, focused on a mission when most would have abandoned hope. "The operation begins at midnight," she continued, indicating the tactical planning displayed on one monitor. "Director Harrington will be working late reviewing the evidence we've already provided. Reynolds will have assets monitoring the director's movements. All attention will be focused on that interaction. While we enter through a different route," Warren concluded. "Exactly, there's a maintenance tunnel accessing the sub-basement level. Security coverage is minimal, 2 guards on rotating schedules, standard card readers. Once inside, we use service corridors to reach the secure server room on level 3. "And if we encounter resistance?" Blackwood asked. Morgan's expression hardened slightly. "Non-lethal approaches whenever possible. These are American security personnel following protocols. They're not our enemies." "And Reynolds?" She didn't answer immediately, her eyes focused on the tactical display. "Reynolds made his choices 30 years ago. He's had ample time to consider their moral implications." The boat had moved steadily downriver during their conversation, maintaining a course that avoided main shipping channels and monitoring stations. Now it approached a private dock connected to an industrial area where several vehicles waited. "We transfer here," Morgan announced. Separate vehicles, different routes. Rendezvous at the insertion point at 2330 hours. As they prepared to disembark, Blackwood studied Morgan more carefully. Despite 30 years in isolation, she operated with absolute precision, every movement economical, every decision based on thorough planning. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, only the focused determination of someone who had dedicated their existence to a single purpose. One question, he said as they gathered equipment. After this is over, assuming we succeed, what then? Morgan paused, seemingly caught off guard by the question. For the first time, Blackwood saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. I haven't thought beyond the mission, she admitted. For 30 years, this has been my only focus. There was never any after in my planning. There will be now, Warren said quietly, and you'll need to decide who Morgan Stevens becomes when she's no longer a ghost. She nodded slowly, absorbing this reality. First, we ensure there is an after to consider. Reynolds won't go quietly. When he realizes we're making a direct approach to the secure server, he'll deploy everything at his disposal to stop us. Then we'd better not give him time to realize it, Blackwood said. They separated as planned, each taking a different vehicle following distinct routes toward their destination. Morgan drove alone, her mind focused entirely on the operation ahead. 30 years of preparation, of patience, of maintaining her skills while gathering evidence, all culminating in this night's work. The ghost was emerging from the shadows, and William Reynolds would finally face the specter he had created through his own betrayal. The service tunnel beneath Langley was exactly as Morgan had described, dimly lit, infrequently patrolled, secured by outdated card readers, easily bypassed with the specialized equipment she provided. Warren moved first, his decades of experience evident in his silent, efficient movement. Blackwood followed, covering their rear approach. Morgan came last, monitoring his security systems through a customized tablet. Guard rotation in 90 seconds, she whispered, holding position until clear. They waited in silence as a security officer passed through an adjacent corridor, completely unaware of their presence. Once clear, they proceeded through the maintenance areas, using service elevators and utility shafts to avoid main corridors with camera coverage. Level 3 access point ahead, Morgan indicated. 2 card readers, biometric scan for the final door. Countermeasures, Warren asked. She produced a small device from her equipment bag. Replication module for the card readers. For the biometric scanner, we have this. The second device looked like a medical injector. Synthetic fingerprint film, she explained. Reynolds' own print pattern recreated from samples I've collected over the years. You've been planning this for a very long time, Blackwood observed. Every contingency, every security upgrade, every protocol change, I've tracked them all, developed counters for each. She checked her tablet again. Security sweep on this level in 7 minutes. We need to move. The card readers yielded to Morgan's technology. The biometric scanner hesitated momentarily before accepting the synthetic print, granting access to a secure corridor leading to isolated server rooms. Third door on the right, Morgan directed. Reynolds' private server, standalone system air-gapped from main networks. The room was small, climate-controlled, containing a single server rack with multiple security features. Morgan approached it with practiced efficiency, connecting specialized equipment designed to bypass the security protocols without triggering alerts. How long? Warren asked, positioning himself near the door. 4 minutes for initial access, another 3 to extract the critical files. She worked rapidly, her fingers moving across specialized keyboards, with the fluid precision of someone who had rehearsed these exact movements countless times. Security patrol approaching adjacent corridor. Blackwood warned him, monitoring their tactical awareness display. Hold positions, Morgan replied without looking up. Their route doesn't include this room unless alarms are triggered. The minutes passed with excruciating slowness, the only sound the soft hum of the server and the quiet clicking of Morgan's equipment. Finally, she disconnected a small data drive now containing the evidence they sought. Complete, she announced. Extraction route, same as entry. They retraced their steps through the service areas, maintaining communications discipline, moving with the careful precision of experienced operators. The operation had proceeded exactly according to plan, perhaps too perfectly. This feels wrong, Blackwood said as they approached the final exit point. No complications, no adaptive security response. Morgan nodded, her expression tight. Reynolds should have detected our presence by now. His private security protocols would alert him to any access attempt. Unless he wanted us to succeed, Warren suggested. Unless this was all part of his plan. They paused at the final doorway, Morgan checking security feeds one last time. No unusual deployment of security personnel. No lockdown protocols activated. Which means either we've actually maintained complete stealth or we're walking into a trap, Morgan finished. He's waiting for us to exit to emerge into an area where he can deploy private contractors without witnesses. Blackwood considered their options. Alternative exit routes. Morgan brought up the building schematic on her tablet. Two possibilities. Emergency evacuation tunnel connecting to the parking structure or maintenance access to the adjacent building. Both would be covered if this is indeed a trap, Warren noted. Then we change the paradigm, Morgan decided. Instead of evading Reynolds, we confront him directly. You want to find Reynolds now tonight? Blackwood asked incredulously. He'll be in the building, monitoring the situation personally, most likely from his private office on the executive level. If we can reach him directly, present the evidence to both him and the director simultaneously. Warren considered this. Risky, but it eliminates his ability to deploy deniable assets against us. Inside Langley itself, he's constrained by official protocols, witnesses' documentation. Exactly. Reynolds has survived for decades by operating in shadows using private contractors and deniable operations. Force him into the light, surround him with official witnesses, and his advantage disappears. They altered course using Morgan's intimate knowledge of the building's layout to navigate toward the executive level. Security increased substantially as they approached, requiring more sophisticated countermeasures and careful timing between patrol rotations. Director's office ahead, Morgan indicated. Reynolds will be nearby monitoring the verification progress. The executive corridor was empty, lights dimmed for the late hour. Through glass panels, they could see Harrington in his office, surrounded by documents and secure tablets, deeply engaged in reviewing the evidence they had provided earlier. Reynolds, Warren asked quietly. Morgan checked her tablet, accessing internal security feeds. Adjacent office, alone. Then we end this, Blackwood said. Now. They approached Reynolds' office, cautiously aware that the man had survived decades in the most dangerous profession on Earth. Underestimating him would be fatal, regardless of his age or apparent isolation. The door was unlocked, their first warning that something was wrong. As they entered, Reynolds sat calmly behind his desk, a glass of scotch in his hand, appearing completely unsurprised by their arrival. Morgan Simon, he greeted her, his voice steady. After all these years, you look weathered. Morgan remained in the doorway, her posture alert. William, you look exactly as I expected. Comfortable, protected, insulated from the consequences of your actions. He smiled thinly. Always so righteous. Some things never change. Berlin changed everything, she replied. You saw to that. Reynolds took a measured sip from his glass. Berlin was business, nothing personal. You were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, discovered things you weren't meant to know. You betrayed everything the agency stands for. Sacrificed loyal operatives for personal gain. Built a private empire using connections and resources meant to protect this country. I built something that would survive the political winds, the changing administrations, the shifting priorities, he countered. Something enduring in a world of temporary allegiances. Warren stepped forward. We have the server data, Reynolds, everything. The Berlin operation, the financial networks, the private contractors, all of it. The director is already verifying the initial evidence. Reynolds appeared unmoved by this declaration. Harrington is a bureaucrat, cautious, procedural. By the time he acts on any evidence, it will be too late. Too late for what? Blackwood asked. The older man set down his glass precisely. For preventing the necessary transition. My network continues regardless of what happens to me personally. The infrastructure is already in place, the succession planned decades ago. Hayes, Morgan concluded, among others, younger, adaptable, committed to the vision. Reynolds turned his attention back to Morgan. You spent 30 years pursuing justice as you define it. Admirable persistence, if ultimately futile. It ends tonight, she stated firmly. The evidence goes to the director, to the Secretary of Defense, to oversight committees. Your network exposed, your legacy destroyed. Perhaps, Reynolds conceded, but at what cost? He pressed a button beneath his desk. Instantly, security alarms activated throughout the building. Emergency protocols engaged, secure doors closing automatically. Communication systems locking down. Full security breach, he announced calmly. 3 armed intruders in the executive suite. Response protocols dictate immediate containment, lethal force authorized. Warren moved toward him, but Reynolds raised his hand. I wouldn't. The security teams are already responding. Standard protocols for executive protection include immediate evacuation of senior leadership to secure locations. The director is already being moved. You're sacrificing yourself, Morgan realized, creating a situation where we'll be killed during an apparent infiltration attempt, while ensuring the director is separated from the evidence. As I said, nothing personal, simply ensuring the continuation of what I've built. Security teams could be heard approaching in the corridors, multiple armed personnel following emergency protocols moving with tactical precision toward the executive suite. We need to move, Blackwood urged. Now. Reynolds smiled coldly. Nowhere to go. The building is designed specifically to prevent what you've attempted. Every exit covered, every escape route monitored. You might have entered with Morgan's impressive countermeasures, but leaving during a full security alert. Impossible. Morgan's expression remained calm despite the deteriorating situation. You've overlooked something critical, William. And what might that be? I never intended to leave. She produced a small transmitter from her pocket. The evidence has already been transmitted to multiple secure locations. Time released, automatically distributing to oversight committees. Inspector General, even select media outlets. Your network exposed completely regardless of what happens to us. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Reynolds' face. You're bluffing. 30 years, William. 30 years of planning, preparation, contingencies. Did you really think I would risk everything on a single approach, a single piece of evidence, a single night's operation? The security teams had reached the outer offices, their tactical movements visible through the glass partitions. It's over, Morgan continued. Whether we survive tonight or not, your legacy is finished. The only question remaining is whether you face justice in a courtroom or in whatever afterlife you believe awaits. Reynolds' composure cracked momentarily. With surprising speed for his age, he reached into his desk drawer, producing a small caliber pistol. Always the idealist, he said, aiming at Morgan. Always believing justice prevails. The gunshot echoed in the confined space, but it wasn't Reynolds' weapon that fired. Warren had drawn his sidearm with the practiced speed of decades of training, placing a single round precisely into Reynolds' shoulder, causing the older man to drop his weapon unfired. Enough, Warren said firmly. It ends without further bloodshed. Security teams breached the office seconds later, weapons trained on all of them. Confusion reigned momentarily as contradictory situations presented themselves. Reynolds wounded but alive, 3 intruders present, but one being a decorated colonel, another a highly respected SEAL commander. Stand down, came an authoritative voice from the doorway. Director Harrington entered, surrounded by his security detail, but clearly in command of the situation. Secure Mr. Reynolds. Medical attention but under guard. As Reynolds was treated by medical personnel, Harrington turned to Morgan. Miss Stevens, after 30 years you're officially alive again. Sir, she acknowledged simply, your evidence was compelling. Initial verification confirms the primary accusations. The rest will take time, but the pattern is clear. He gestured to the flash drive she held. I assume that contains additional confirmation. Complete server contents, she confirmed. The entire network documented exhaustively. Harrington nodded, then addressed the security teams. These 3 individuals are to be placed in protective custody, not detention. They are cooperating witnesses in a counterintelligence investigation of the highest priority. As they were escorted from the office, Morgan paused beside Reynolds' stretcher. The wounded man glared at her with undimmed hatred. Was it worth it? He asked bitterly. 30 years in the wilderness, sacrificing everything normal in life just to reach this moment. Morgan considered him thoughtfully. Justice always has a cost, William. You taught me that in Berlin. The difference is I was willing to pay it myself rather than forcing others to pay it for me. She turned away, leaving Reynolds to contemplate the collapse of everything he had built. The ghost from his past had finally emerged from shadows, bringing with her the truth he had tried to bury 3 decades earlier. As dawn broke over Langley, Morgan Stevens stood by a window in a secure conference room, watching the sunrise for the first time in years, without the weight of her mission pressing upon her. Warren and Blackwood sat nearby, all three processing the night's events as they awaited formal debriefing. "What happens now?" Blackwood asked. Morgan turned from the window. "Investigation, prosecution, dismantling of the network. Standard procedures once extraordinary circumstances are contained." "I meant for you," he clarified. "After 30 years as a ghost, who does Morgan Stevens become now?" She had no immediate answer. For 3 decades, her identity had been defined by a single purpose: gathering evidence, preparing for this moment. Without that mission, who was she? Warren approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You mentioned it once that your father taught you to hunt in the mountains of Montana, that you found peace in those forests." She nodded slowly. "The cabin was always more home than any official posting." "Then perhaps that's where you begin again. Not as an operator, not as a ghost, but simply as Morgan Stevens." "There will be debriefings," Harrington said, entering the room. "Extensive ones. Your knowledge, your methods, your network, all valuable beyond measure. After that, however, certain accommodations can be arranged. A return to civilian life with appropriate security." "A normal life," Morgan said, testing the concept as if it were a foreign language. "I'm not sure I remember what that means." "You'll relearn," Blackwood assured her. "One day at a time." "Meanwhile," Harrington continued, "there's the matter of recognition. 30 years of unauthorized but ultimately patriotic service. Difficult to acknowledge publicly, but certain discreet honors can be arranged." "I never did this for recognition," Morgan replied. "No," Warren agreed. "You did it for justice, for loyalty to principles rather than people, for the oath you took and never abandoned even when others did." Months later, in a private ceremony held at a secure Virginia location, Morgan Stevens stood at attention as the Secretary of Defense himself presented her with a medal that officially didn't exist. Her service record, recreated after 30 years of official death, now reflected a unique designation: Ghost Operative Exceptional Service. Blackwood and Warren attended, both recently promoted for their roles in exposing the network. Reynolds faced prosecution, his empire dismantled, his legacy destroyed. Hayes, caught between complicity and ignorance, had cooperated fully, saving himself from the worst consequences while accepting a diminished career. After the ceremony, as they walked the grounds of the secure facility, Blackwood asked the question that had been on his mind since Langley. "That shot in Korengal, through the enemy sniper's scope at 1,500 yards, how certain were you?" Morgan smiled slightly. "Mathematics is absolute, Commander. Wind speed angle, atmospheric conditions, ballistic coefficients, all variables in an equation. Solve it correctly and the result is inevitable." "And if you had missed," her expression sobered, "then you wouldn't be here asking the question." "But I didn't miss. I never do when it matters most." "Will you miss it?" Warren asked. "The operations, the purpose, the mission." Morgan considered this as she looked toward the mountains in the distance. "I'll miss the clarity, everything else, the isolation, the constant vigilance, the knowledge that a single mistake means death. No, I won't miss those." "What will you do now?" "Really do once the debriefings end." "There's a cabin in Montana," she replied. "Needs rebuilding after all these years. Good hunting in those mountains. Peace that I haven't known in decades." Warren nodded with understanding. "And if the country needs you again—" Morgan Stevens, no longer a ghost, but not quite reintegrated into the world she had protected, from shadows looked between the two men who had helped bring her in from the cold. "Then they'll know where to find me," she said simply. "I'll be watching. I always am." As they parted ways that evening, Blackwood to return to operational command, Warren to his training role with a new generation of specialists, Morgan Stevens began her journey back to the mountains that had shaped her. The ghost had emerged from shadows, had fulfilled her 3-decade mission, had ensured justice for those betrayed long ago. Now she would discover what remained of Morgan Stevens beneath the operational identity, beneath the mission, beneath the ghostly existence she had maintained for so long. It would be her final and perhaps most challenging mission, rediscovering humanity after decades focused solely on justice. The sniper who could make impossible shots would now attempt something even more difficult, building a life after being dead to the world for 30 years. But if anyone could accomplish such a mission, it was the woman who had never missed when it mattered most.